What if I told you that one enslaved man's religious vision led to the deadliest slave rebellion in American history? What if I told you that Nat Turner and his followers killed nearly 60 white people in 48 hours, and that in retaliation, white mobs slaughtered over 200 black people? Most had nothing to do with the uprising. This isn't just about a violent rebellion. This is about a man so desperate for freedom, so convinced of his divine mission that he was willing to sacrifice everything, including his own life and the lives of his people, to strike back against the evils of slavery. Now, before I tell you the story of Nat Turner, the preacher turned revolutionary who terrified the entire South and changed the course of American history, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We're building a community of truth tellers who refuse to let these stories of Black resistance be sanitized or forgotten. I remember it was my older brother James, God rest his soul, that told me about Nat Turner. While doing so, he spoke with so much pride. So much so that when the riot broke out in my hometown of Toledo, Ohio, after the announcement of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., my brother James was in the thick of it. I could never reconcile the violence of Nat Turner's rebellion with the violence of slavery, because in my opinion, Nat Turner had a right to resist abuse, whereas with slavery, abuse was initiated. And although many historians and religious scholars felt that it was not God's will that Nat Turner carried out the violent slave insurrection, Nat Turner believed it was. Nat Turner's rebellion shows us the difference between the then and the now. In his revolt, for the sake of escaping slavery, he was rejected. But now in 2021, when white America carried out an insurrection, believing an election was stolen without the court's ruling that there was sufficient evidence of that, the act was considered by some to be justified. I've discussed Nat Turner with some of my family, but certainly not all, and I really need to do that, I feel. A question was asked: how do you explain resistance that includes violence to the next generation? And my answer is, if you're not the one initiating the violence, you have every right to engage in violence to defend yourself. And another question was, what parallels do I see between Turner's religious conviction and modern day movements? And I can't actually say that I see any parallels at this time. I do see an uprising throughout the country, but I don't think it's to the extent of what I saw in Nat Turner's rebellion. Nat Turner's rebellion of 1831 stands as one of the most significant and unsettling uprisings in American history. It was not merely a violent event, but a declaration of humanity in a society built upon the dehumanization of millions for the enslaved who lived under brutal conditions in the antebellum South. Turner's revolt represented both a cry for freedom and a prophetic act of defiance against an unjust system. The rebellion, which took place in Southampton County, Virginia, sent shockwaves across the United States and left a legacy that still provokes debate about race, resistance, and the moral dimensions of slavery. Nat Turner, a deeply religious and literate enslaved man, led a small band of enslaved followers in an uprising that resulted in the deaths of approximately 60 white people. In retaliation, white militias and mobs killed an estimate of 200 black people, many whom had no involvement in the revolt. The rebellion's impact was far-reaching. It hardened the institution of slavery, intensified laws controlling enslaved and free black people, and exposed the deep moral and political divisions that would later culminate in the Civil War. To understand Nat Turner's rebellion, one must confront the violence of slavery itself and the length in which people will go to reclaim their dignity and their freedom. Nat Turner was born into slavery on October the 2nd, 1800 in Southampton County, Virginia. His mother, Nancy, was an enslaved woman who belonged to Benjamin Turner, a prosperous plantation owner. Nat's early years were marked by an unusual intensity and intelligence that set him apart from the other children on the plantation. According to latter accounts, his family and fellow enslaved people believed he was destined for greatness. He reportedly exhibited a deep spiritual awareness from a young age, claiming to have visions and divine messages. Nat's literacy was another unique aspect of his early life. While most enslaved people were denied the right to read and write, Turner somehow learned both, likely through the children of his enslavers or secret instruction. Reading the Bible became central to his identity, shaping his worldview and sense of mission. His religious devotion earned him the reputation as a preacher among enslaved communities who referred to him as the prophet. Turner interpreted natural events such as solar eclipses or atmospheric phenomena as signs from God. His sense of divine purpose and spiritual authority would later become the driving force behind the rebellion. Despite his deep faith, Turner's life was one of consistent degradation and suffering. He was hired out to various white men throughout his life, witnessing the cruelty of slavery firsthand. He experienced the whipping of men and women, and the tearing apart of families, and the persistent denial of his humanity. These experiences, combined with his religious convictions, created in Turner a sense of moral urgency. He began to see himself as an instrument of divine justice, chosen to lead his people out of bondage through revolutionary means. By the late 1820s, the institution of slavery in the South was becoming even more entrenched. The cotton economy had expanded dramatically, and enslaved labor was the backbone of Southern wealth. For enslaved people, conditions grew harsher as plantation discipline intensified. Resistance took many forms: running away, sabotage, work shutdowns, and the preservation of African cultural practices. But organized violent revolt was rare due to the overwhelming power of white authorities and the risk of brutal reprisal. For Nat Turner, however, the call to rebel was spiritual and unavoidable. He claimed that in 1825 he received his first divine vision, figures in the sky that he interpreted as a call to action. In 1831 he witnessed a solar eclipse, which he took as a sign that the time for rebellion had come. He began to share his revelations with a small group of trusted fellows: Henry, Hank Travis, Nelson, Sam, and a few others. Over time and the following months, they planned their uprising in secrecy, gathering weapons and building a network of support among other enslaved people in the region. The plan was straightforward yet perilous. They would strike suddenly and without mercy, beginning at the plantation of Turner's enslaver Joseph Travis. From there, they would move from house to house, killing white slaveholders and their families, and gathering more enslaved men to their cause. The ultimate goal was to march towards the county seat of Jerusalem, now Cortland, Virginia, and seize control of the armory. It was an act of desperation and faith born out of centuries of oppression and the belief that divine justice demanded the destruction of slavery. If you're beginning to understand the desperation that drives people to revolutionary violence, Make sure you're subscribed and hit the notification bell, because what happened next would terrorize the entire South. On the night of August 21st, 1831, Nat Turner and his band of roughly 7 men launched their rebellion. They began at the Travis plantation, where they killed Joseph Travis, his wife, and their young son as they slept. Turner later described feeling no guilt, believing he was carrying out God's will. As they moved through the countryside, the insurgents freed enslaved people and killed nearly every white person they encountered, men, women, and children alike. Turner's forces grew to nearly 60 men at the peak. Over the course of 2 days, the group traveled from plantation to plantation, spreading terror among the white residents of Southampton County. The violence was shocking in its scope and intensity. By the time the rebellion was suppressed, approximately 55 white people had been killed. However, the rebellion's success was short-lived. Turner's group was eventually confronted by local militias and army civilians. Many of his followers were killed or captured, and the uprising collapsed within 48 hours. Nat Turner went into hiding for nearly 2 months, evading capture despite an extensive manhunt. He was eventually discovered on October 30th, 1831, hiding in a hole covered by fence rails. Turner was taken to the county jail in Jerusalem, where he awaited trial. His calm demeanor and unwavering faith during his imprisonment shocked those who met him. He expressed no remorse, insisting that his rebellion was divinely inspired and justified. Turner's trial took place on November 5th, 1831. He was found guilty of conspiring to rebel and making insurrection and sentenced to death. On November 11th, he was hanged and later beheaded. His body desecrated by white mobs seeking vengeance. His skull and other body parts were reportedly taken as trophies, a grim reminder of the racial hatred that fueled the institution of slavery. Before his execution, Turner gave a detailed account of his life and motivations to Thomas R. Gray, a white attorney and journalist. Gray published this document under the title, The Confessions of Nat Turner. While historians debate the accuracy in Gray's transcriptions and the possibility of distortions introduced by his own bias, the text remains one of the most important first-hand accounts of an enslaved rebellion. Turner's words reveal a man driven by faith and conviction, who saw his actions as a fulfillment of divine prophecy rather than personal revenge. The aftermath of Nat Turner's rebellion was swift and brutal. White Virginians, and indeed the entire South, reacted with panic and fury. Militia units and vigilantes roamed the countryside, killing any black person suspected of involvement. Historical estimates suggest that as many as 200 black men, women, and children were massacred, many of whom had no connection with the rebellion. Southern legislature responded with a wave of new laws designed to tighten control over both enslaved and free black populations. In Virginia, it became illegal to teach enslaved people to read or write, a direct response to Turner's literacy and ability to organize through spiritual communication. Black preachers were forbidden from holding religious meetings without white supervision. The laws of other Southern states followed suit, making the system of racial control even more oppressive. The rebellion also sparked intense debate across the United States. In the North, abolitionists pointed to Turner's revolt as evidence of slavery's inherent violence, an institution so brutal that rebellion was an inevitable consequence. In contrast, pro-slavery advocates used the uprising to justify harsher control, claiming it proved that enslaved people were dangerous if not strictly subdued. Politically, Nat Turner's rebellion deepened the national divide over slavery, helping to set the stage for the confrontations of the 1850s and ultimately the Civil War. Nat Turner's rebellion occupies a complex place in American memory. For many white Americans in the 19th century, Turner was portrayed as a bloodthirsty fanatic, a dangerous reminder of what could happen if the racial order was challenged. For Black Americans, however, he became a symbol of courage, faith, and an unyielding pursuit for freedom. His rebellion inspired later generations of Black activists, from abolitionists like Frederick Douglass to modern movements seeking racial justice. In the 20th and the 21st centuries, historians and artists have continued to grapple with Turner's legacy. William Sterong's controversial 1967 novel, The Confessions of Nat Turner, reignited debate about how Turner should be represented, whether as a hero, a madman, or a martyr. Now, it's worth noting the publication, The Confessions of Nat Turner, written by Thomas Gray mentioned earlier, was a pamphlet. In 2016, Nate Parker's film, The Birth of a Nation, reclaimed Turner's story from the Black perspective, emphasizing his role as a revolutionary rather than a villain. The evolving portrayals of Nat Turner reveal the ongoing struggle over how America confronts its history of slavery and resistance. Turner's rebellion also serves as a reminder of the human cost of oppression. The violence of the uprising cannot be separated from the daily violence of slavery itself. The whippings, the sexual assaults, the sale of children, and the complete denial of personhood. Nat Turner's actions, while horrifying to many, forced the nation to reckon with the truth that slavery could never be made safe or just. His revolt demonstrated that enslaved people were not passive victims, but active agents in their own liberation, willing to risk everything for freedom. Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831 was a defining moment in the long struggle for Black freedom in America. It exposed the deep moral contradictions of a nation that proclaimed liberty while perpetuating human bondage. Turner's uprising revealed the spiritual and psychological dimensions of resistance, the conviction that God Himself demanded freedom, even if it required bloodshed. The rebellion's brutal suppression and the violent retaliation that followed underscored the lengths to which white society would go to preserve its power. Yet, despite its tragic outcome, the rebellion stands as a testament to the human spirit's refusal to accept enslavement. Nat Turner's legacy endures not because of the violence he unleashed, but because of the truth he embodied, that freedom is a divine and unalienable right. His story remains both a warning and an inspiration, a reminder that the quest for justice often comes at a treacherous cost, but that the fight for human dignity is eternal. Nat Turner believed God called him to lead a rebellion that would free his people. He was killed. 200 innocent Black people were massacred in retaliation, and yet his rebellion forced America to continue to face a truth it wanted to ignore. Slavery could never be peaceful, could never be moral, could never last. Ensure that the upcoming generation understands that resistance isn't always peaceful, that sometimes oppression becomes so unbearable that people choose violence over continued bondage, that Nat Turner wasn't a monster. He was a desperate man living under a monstrous system. If this story challenged you, made you think, opened your eyes to the complexity of slave resistance, I need you to do something for me right now. First, hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these difficult but essential stories from our history. Second, like the video and share it with your family, your church, and your community. This is the history that makes people uncomfortable, which is exactly why it needs to be told. Third, leave a comment and help me teach the next generation. Answer these questions so that others can learn. 1. How do you reconcile Nat Turner's violence with the daily violence of slavery itself? Is violent resistance ever justified? And how do you explain this complexity to the young people? 2. Why do you think white Southerners killed 200 innocent black people in retaliation? What does it tell us about the fear and hatred that sustained slavery? And 3. Nat Turner believed that he was carrying out God's will. How do faith and resistance connect in Black history? What role has the Black church played in freedom movements? Fourth, and this is crucial, read Nat Turner's Slave Rebellion, including the 1831 Confessions by Herbert Apather. Get the full story, including Turner's own words about his visions and motivations. You can find this book in our complete Black History book library at the link in the description and in the pinned comments below. These books give you the complete, unfiltered truth. Don't let your family learn just the sanitized version. Own the books, wrestle with the complexity, and pass down the real history. Don't let anyone reduce Nat Turner to a footnote or a villain. Don't let anyone forget that he was a man pushed to the absolute limit by an evil system. Subscribe, share, and comment your answers, and most of all, build your library. And I'll see you at the next video where we will uncover another story of Black resistance that they did not want you to know. Take care.